Hi, I'm Ken Shorley. On today's video, I want to answer a question that I got from one of my YouTube subscribers, which is, how can I learn to read frame drum notation? I should point out that the notation we'll be talking about in this video is not just used for frame drum. It can be used for really any hand drum, and it is a variation on a form of notation that I learned from my teacher, Professor Trishi Shankran, and he uses this when he notates mridangam and kanjira rhythms from South Indian music. There are three elements that you need to know. I have some references here. I'll start with this. This is, it's funny, this piece, it's not a piece of music. I actually wrote this little sequence just to make a video where I was testing different microphones. I played this bit over and over again. I'll just cut in now so you can hear this sequence once, and then I'll show you the notation. Okay, so there are three elements with this style of notation. Some people call this style a cipher notation. You can also refer to it as a text-based notation. The three elements are: one, the letters, and each letter refers to one of the strokes on the drum. So D for dum, T for tek, K for ka, and so on. And this particular chart that I made has a little key down in the bottom corner where you can see dum, tek, ka, pa, S for snap, R for roll, B for a brushing stroke. And some of these things I had to invent because I had never seen them written out. So the brushing, I did, when you brush up and down on the drum, I used a capital B for down and a small b for up. So you'll see lots of variations. I can't say that that's common, but I try to do things that are clear and that make sense to me when I'm looking at them. That's the first thing. So for instance, if you're going to use this notation to notate djembe rhythms, you can do the same thing. B for bass, T for tone, S for slap, and so on. The underlines are probably the most important bit of rhythmic information. A single underline refers to a subdivision of 2 pulses per beat. So if your main beat is here, and you subdivide tat 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 tat. So that first line, dum tekka pa dum dum, has 4 beats. Dum tekka pa dum dum, and actually there's a little R rolling into the tek, and I've seen this other places. I like using this for rolls because I think of them as grace notes added onto a main note. So I use a superscript R, so it's a little smaller and a little higher. Dum rekka pa dum dum, dum rekka pa dum dum. Okay, so those, the second beat and the third beat, because there's an underline, it means that you subdivide each one of those beats into 2 pulses. The next line has another usage of the underline. This is a double underline, and this is something that I learned from Professor Shankran. The 2 underlines together mean that you subdivide that beat into 4 equal pulses. So your beat is still the same, and it's ta 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 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. So that second line, rekka pa dum dum taka taka. The first 2 beats subdivided in 2 pulses. Yet, da, da, da. The third beat, there's no underline. That dum takes up the whole third beat. Rekka pa dum dum, taka taka. And that double underline means you subdivide it further, so it's 4 pulses in that one beat. The third element, so you've got the letters, which refer to the drum strokes, the underlines, which refer to the subdivision of each beat, and dashes. And the dashes, you can see on the 1 2 3 4, on the 5th line down, there are 2 different examples of how a dash is used. On the second beat there's a dash and then a P for a pa. That means there's a space in that first pulse. You're still subdividing that beat into 2 pulses, da 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 da, 1 2 1 2, but that means that the first pulse is silent, and the pa is on the second pulse of that beat, on the and. Tekka pa dum. Tekka pa dum. So there's no sound directly on the second beat. 1 and 3 4. Tekka pa dum. And that larger dash means that that 4th beat is a complete silence. So those 3 elements are what you need to know when you're trying to interpret a written chart that's designed for frame drum or for darbuka or for other other hand drums. All the subdivisions I've talked about are all duple, 1 to 2 to 4 and so on. How do you notate something clearly which is using triplet subdivisions? Dot, 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 dot. And probably the simplest thing is just to use a single underline and to put 3 syllables or a combination of dashes and syllables. Taquita, taquita. There's something that I've been using recently. I haven't seen this before, but it helps me. Whenever there's a triplet figure, I put the text in italics. So it makes it stand out to me as a different thing when I'm looking at it. You can see on the second to the last line here, I used a pattern, taquita, taquita, dum. This is a split hand pattern on frame drum, but you'll notice there's a single underline. I think it's a single underline. So there's a single underline, but there's 6 pulses. Okay, taquita, taquita, dum. That means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's what my teacher would call double tishra. Okay, tishra is ta 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 ta. Double tishra, taquita, 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 taquita. So you don't have to use this if you're notating your own pieces. You don't need to italicize the tishra or the triplet figures, but it's something that I've started doing, and I find that it makes things a little more clear. Now, if you're a follower of the great frame drum teacher and performer Glen Velez, you've probably noticed that when Glen publishes scores of his pieces, he uses a different system. He uses a variation on Western staff notation, and this is maybe due to the fact that his background is in Western classical music. Before he became a frame drum specialist, he was trained as a mallet keyboard specialist, and he was a member of Steve Reich Ensemble, blah, blah, blah. So he learned how to read Western staff music like all Western classical musicians do. So his scores, when you see them, they're written using a variation of a staff notation. So in order for you to interpret Glen scores, and it's not just Glen, I've noticed that other frame drummers who are students of Glen, David Kuckerman, Yusef Sharonik, these other musicians also use a variation that's based on this staff notation that Glen uses. And what I have one little printout here of a piece. This came off David Kuckerman's website. And you'll notice that there's a 3-line staff. So rather than the full 5-line staff that Western classical music uses, the version which is used here is a 3-line staff. Now there's two vertical lines at the front. That is what's sometimes referred to as a percussion clef, meaning that you can have relative pitch. Notes that are written on the lower lines are lower pitched, but they're not tuned to specific pitches. So when you have a percussion clef, it's also an unpitched clef. So the way Glen uses this is that notes written on the bottom line are the low sound. So usually dum is written on the low line. On the top line, tek and ka, the sounds that are played at the edge of the drum, those are written on the top line. And oftentimes the middle line is reserved for pa. Now, I've used a version of this when I published some hand drum music. The piece that I wrote for Torque Percussion Quartet, called The Bright Side, uses this, although it's an even simpler version than this. I use a 1-line percussion clef, and I just write the dum below the line and the pa below the line with an X note head. So you can see that those two are different. Because for me, dum and pa on the frame drum are kind of in the same part of the drum. So that's how I would, pardon me, I should qualify. There is no frame drum in this piece. It's for darbuka and for Rick, but I've used versions of this. So dum and pa, I would write below that line, and tek and ka, I would write above. I also tend to favor writing the actual syllables, the D's and T's, underneath the line, almost like you would notate lyrics. So then it's very, very clear what stroke is meant for what. So I hope that helps. That's a quick starter's guide for how to read frame drum notation. If you have questions about this, please leave it in the comments below. If you would like to subscribe to the channel, I would love it if you did. And please join me again for more videos about rhythm, drumming, and percussion.